Hello and welcome to the podcast of FringeArtCulture.com. This podcast aims to enrich the community by focusing on local art and culture. We are your hosts. I'm Grant and this is Alison.
Hey, how you going?
Welcome to episode 8.
On this podcast, we'll be exploring in more depth the topics raised and artists featured on the blog during the month.
But we also want to hear from you. Hit us up on the comments or on our contact page. Let us know what you're up to. We want this to be a community built by the community for the community. We'll be chatting with artists, authors and musicians, sharing with you the best of what we can find in our local community, including author readings, flash interviews with musicians and sets from amateur comedians. And we'll be catching you up on what's been happening and what's coming up in the local area. All this on demand when it's convenient for you via the blog or your podcast provider of choice.
This month on the blog, we looked at spiritual celebrations, cultures and mortality. And it was fed by a meeting I had with the Logan Writers Group, or a couple of members who have just started meeting up again. And we decided that because of Halloween coming up tonight, Halloween everybody, happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween.
That we would just have a look and kind of explore that a little bit. It's been really fun to get some different perspectives.
As we sit here tonight, it's actually about 10:30 on Halloween night. So we just thought we would talk about the history of it, talk about how the ideas changed over time, and kind of use that as a kicking off point to talk a little bit about other cultural traditions, and how they maybe don't mean what they used to mean, and maybe they mean something different, and maybe we can make up our own as we go along. And then we'll also talk about some of the stuff that's going on, and we'll end off with some readings from Mitchell Tierney, which finish off his short series, Ghost Children.
The first two chapters of which we've put up again for you, just so you've got easy access to them on SoundCloud this week.
As a standalone thing, yep.
Yep. So once this is done and you've all had a listen, we might check the others up, join it in SoundCloud.
Yeah. Okay, so to start off with, we might just quickly go through what's been happening and what's coming up. We've got the Logan Social Enterprise Expo, which is actually coming up on Wednesday, so hopefully people will get to hear this before that happens. With the keynote speaker Cameron Burgess. Apparently this is a must for those wanting to make a positive social impact. Also coming up in early November on the 5th and the 6th, Beenleigh Theatre Group are having their auditions for Willie Russell's Blood Brothers. November 15th to the 20th at the Percolator Gallery at Paddington, there is the exhibition Translucency, which is featuring Omi Lee and Damien Smith, as well as many others. On the 25th of November, we have a local one. Inspiring Events is putting on Inspiring Artistic Expression at Wellwood Logan Home with speakers Tracy Eaton and Ange Peter. Tracy is an artist and she's doing a series at the moment called Emergence. And Ange Peter is a co-founder and co-director of Ruckus Slam, and she is also a spoken word artist.
If you've got any more events you'd like us to spruik, then just let us know, jump on the Facebook page or just email us and we'll chuck them on.
Now, we're just going to give you a Fringe update, what's going on with us. We've got some interesting stuff happening as well. So in December, we'll be having our inaugural event. And
Yep, December 11th. Just about to confirm the date. So there is an event on Facebook. It's on our page. You'll be able to find it really easily. Lots of exciting stuff happening there. We've got Damien Smith, and he'll be talking about the business side of art. We'll have Karen Terrell, who will run through. She's a well-known Logan author of, I think, 9 books now. She's got an amazing story and a journey that she's going to share with us. We've got Peter Thompson. She'll be sharing with us the social media side of being an artist, and this can apply not just to artists and creatives themselves, but also across the board. So her tips will be invaluable. We'll also have Sean Diver. Sean Diver had just won the Jacaranda best new song or something.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. That's all in the Facebook event as well. You can have a look at that. So he'll be playing some tunes for us. And Phil B is also going to be doing some live art for us. So that's also really exciting. He's such a good artist. So get along.
And this will all be at Toscani's at the Hyperdome.
Yep. So it's yet to be, the details are yet to be confirmed, but we're looking at 2:00 for a couple of hours. Come down, even if you're just walking past, have a sticky beak, see what's there. They'll have heaps of creatives on board. Just, come and talk to some people. It'll be awesome.
The other super exciting thing we have is the app that we're producing or getting made. It'll include things like an event calendar, also a shop and a catalogue for artwork that's on display around Logan by supportive local businesses. And you'll also have access to our YouTube channel via the app directly, so that you can get access to the podcast episodes, the flash readings, as well as little videos of artist interviews for all the artists that are being displayed.
Yep. So obviously all the blog and everything will be accessed through there as well. And that's very much thank you to App City for helping us develop that one. That's awesome.
So, Halloween.
Yeah, so we've had mixed sort of ideas on the value of Halloween, and I've seen a lot of stuff online tonight about how this is an American holiday and blah blah blah, and like anything, it's become very commercialized because yes, people like to dress up because it's fun, and therefore you can make lots of money on costumes, etc., etc.
Is it just like Valentine's Day?
Yeah, whatever. But what I think people fail to do is look a little bit deeper, and just actually think about where this stuff comes from. And I don't necessarily like
what's the cultural core of it?
Most people, I knew a little bit about the history of Halloween because it's released every year. Everyone goes through it. So, it comes from Samhain Festival, which is a Celtic, originally a Celtic pastoral festival at the end of their pastoral year, which was November 1st was the first day of that year for them. So the last day was the 31st. All the spirits were said to have, who have died in that entire year, go off into the other world. And so that's why, people would sacrifice not just, chickens and livestock, I guess, but lots of food and stuff as well. So that's sort of where the tradition, I think, has grown from trick-or-treating and all that kind of stuff.
And thinking back to it in those sorts of times, it was really this was a line in the sand of the barrier between life and death, because they usually went into a pretty harsh sort of a winter where. And
from what I've read, it was the Christians who came and decided to convert most of the Celtic people. They were the ones that convinced them that the ghosts and the ghouls and the spirits and everyone were, and the fae and everyone, they were evil. And part of that was because they wanted to convert them to the good way of the Lord. But I wonder, and I'm not sure on this, so someone please let me know. I wonder how much of the evil side of stuff had come through from that sort of thinning of the veil first, and whether it was more about a celebration of letting go, because you're letting go of your loved ones. It's like an emancipation of sorts, a closure almost.
Yeah.
And that sort of transfers over when you look at things like the Day of the Dead. The Day of the Dead was a similar thing where they basically built shrines and had food, altars with food, the favourite foods of the people who had passed recently. They would put photos and dance and sing and celebrate the lives of people who had died, rather than, because their belief was that the deceased people didn't want you to grieve. That's not what they wanted. That would disappoint them. So they wanted to celebrate their lives. So it's all, I guess, it's an acknowledgement of that cycle.
Yeah.
Death is as much part of life as anything. We're so scared of our immortality.
Or our mortality. Or
Oh yeah, immortality. Freudian slip. But and then you look.
Well, it's an interesting question. Like, you can almost go down that track of the idea of being mortal as being human. You know, if you didn't have mortality, there would be no nothing to strive for, like, because
There's no end goal.
there's no finite end. It doesn't have the same meaning. Yeah, that's one of the things in the whole kind of either transhumanist or, like, you know, downloading your brain to a machine sort of idea, or living forever ever through kind of advanced biology. You know, who would want that? What would life mean anymore? So that's an interesting question to kind of talk about as well at some point in the future.
To a certain
maybe.
degree, we are sort of immortal because we leave behind a legacy. And like, not everybody's legacy is remembered, but it might be remembered to the people closest to them. And I guess that's the point.
Yeah, that's kind of all we can get for as immortality at this stage.
Yeah. And I think that's enough.
Just back on for a second to the idea of, were those spirits and stuff evil in the same regard? Probably not. Weren't they thought of as more just kind of mischievous? Like, not necessarily...
From the Celtics' point of view?
Yeah. Like, there were definitely more kind of mischievous demons and stuff around. There maybe some malicious, but I think that was also...
Yeah,
you had kind of, like, fairies would trick you. They would, like, move things and, you know, all that sort of stuff as well. They were...
Yeah, I'm not sure 100% on that aspect of it.
Yeah.
But I know that even today, I mean, I read a post from a couple of years ago, I think it might have been 2013, about Iceland and how even today they still hold...
Oh, yeah, there was a thing recently about a rock that got moved during some roadways being done, and they thought that it put a curse on something, and they wanted this rock.
Yeah, well, they still
put
hold
back.
protests and stuff in regards to construction because they don't want to disturb that. Like, there was a road that was supposed to go straight, or, you know, cut through some land.
Yeah.
And the councils have had to release specific information saying, yes, we have taken these into considerations, and we have made these changes, and we have spent this money to allow for these, you know, little people, elves and stuff, which I actually think is beautiful. And it's almost like an embodiment of your connection to the land.
Yeah, in some way.
Do you know what I mean? And even if it's not true, that folklore, it serves a purpose.
Yeah, it's similar to the kind of the Aboriginal dreaming and stuff, the connection with the land.
Yeah.
If it's not the places and the people, it's, you know,
and that's one common thing I found, is that a lot of these, you know, spiritual cultures are all embedded in, you know, natural cycles of not just in human mortality.
Death and rebirth. Birth of the land itself.
Yeah.
One other thing I heard about the whole trick-or-treat side of things was that, so you've got the food aspect that came from the Celtic religions and similar in the Day of the Dead traditions of Spain and Mexico, I guess. Is that where they come from? Is that in the US, because there was a big disparity in kind of wealth for a period of time, you know, this was, you know, a couple of 100 years ago, poorer people would actually go around house to house, and they would actually act as like entertainment for the rich people in the hope that they would actually be given some form of charity. And that's, you know, it was probably that singing and dancing from other parts of this cultural tradition that was kind of getting a new cultural use, which is kind of interesting to think of the way cultures do that. And then so from there, and then it's kind of come down to it's basically just something for the kids to go and do and get candy, you know, because we live in such a culture of abundance. We can kind of do that.
Commercialized world that we have.
Yeah. And there's this other interesting tradition in America where because some of the Christian communities, they don't like the idea of the kids going out, house to house. What they'll do is they'll get their cars and they'll do up their boots, their car boot, and they'll all go into the church car park and they'll open up their car boots and they'll have like little dioramas in their car boots, which is kind of weird. But then they also have these Christian hell houses. One of which I heard of recently that got shut down because it was a bit not just a bit inappropriate. They actually had a scene from the recent nightclub massacre.
Oh God.
Yeah. So as kind of like a don't be gay or something. I don't know.
Oh.
But yeah, it's a little bit tasteless. But
way to
yeah.
commercialise on something so insensitive.
Yeah, that was actually a church group that did that. So yeah, hell houses. They're apparently a really interesting thing in the whole Halloween tradition in America. So luckily we haven't taken that part on. But yeah, like in the South, they do like these corn mazes. Like the guys from one of the podcasts I listen to, they actually grow a corn maze every year. They actually grow the corn in like a certain pattern, and like they start in like, was it July?
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, that is.
The one thing I looked at when I was writing my article for the blog this month, and I was pulling my hair out trying to narrow it down. I think I wrote so many words, but I came across this really awesome artist, and I'll probably put some more information about her in the blog. I haven't yet, but her name's Anna Mendieta, and she died fairly young at 34 or 35. Apparently alleged murder by her new husband at the time, but her work was really experimental and exploratory, and she pushed a lot of boundaries. She did things like she staged a rape scene where she covered her legs in cow's blood, and this was just after a rape on her campus at university. And she tied herself to a table with her pants off, couldn't move, and she invited people over. And so she would just, for hours, she just had a stream of people coming through her dorm room when she was bent over a table, and there was a photo taken of her, and you could just see her ass and her legs. And it was, that kind of...
What year was this?
It was the 70s, I think.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's risque. That's pretty progressive.
Yeah,
that's stuff they're still talking about kind of now, like issues they're still talking about now.
Yeah, so she was really quite a pioneer, but she also did a lot of these, she just does short films and stuff, but a lot of photography that was kind of out there. And she covered herself with a lot of dirt and feathers and things and kind of placed herself in parts. And there's this one photo where she's kind of lying down in between some kind of rocks, which looks like she's dug out like a shallow grave, and she's covered herself in like wildflowers. So it looks like the flowers are literally growing out of her body, and she's lying there naked. You can't see her face or any of her features, but you can see flowers and her body there. And it's kind of an interesting commentary on, mortality itself and the impermanence of life and what happens after we're dead and all that kind of stuff. And I recommend, I'll put this in the show notes. I recommend anyone looking it up. It's really, really fascinating.
Cool.
Yeah. So we're going to cut now to the reading by Mitchell. It's a really cool ending, so enjoy. But for now, we're going to say goodnight. We'll see you again next month. Please do check out the Facebook page and jump on and click on through and tell us you're coming to this event. We'd love to see you there. Tell your friends about it, and we'll see you next time.
Ghost Children, Chapter 3. "It won't work," the man yelled, flicking the switch on and off. "I told you," said the man still standing in the archway of the front door. "There's no power. The wiring's too old. The rats have eaten it." The man at the light switch was rotund, with massive arms and short stubby legs. His business pants were twice as big as needed to be to accommodate such enormous legs. On 2 fingers on each hand he wore silver rings, One of his eyes was lazy and the eyelid was constantly half closed over. He bent down and stared at the light switch. So no one lives here? The other man was tall and carried a briefcase. He had a moustache which was long and curled at the ends. His fingers were slender and his nails were kept trim. He had medium-length black hair which was slicked back with oil. No, Mr. Coldrake, no one lives here. No one has for nearly 50 years. Well, Mr. Miles, maybe you should show me around. Put the hard sell on me. Mr. Miles stepped into the dilapidated house. He sniffed twice quickly and suddenly sneezed. He didn't like the dust or dirt or cobwebs. It got up his sinuses into his lungs and made him sick. As I said previously, in the car, I am not a real estate agent. I am an accountant for your firm. I was sent to make sure this house, he said with scorn in his voice, is economically viable. Mr. Coldrake nodded. He ran his hands over the peeling walls. The wood felt soft and weak. He pushed on one board and it cracked under the pressure. It will have to be knocked down, he stated suddenly, staring down the hallway. It cannot be knocked down. As discussed in the car merely 5 minutes ago, it is a heritage-listed building. Also, the scene of a horrendous crime. Mr. Coldrake snapped his head around. A crime? Yes. In the late 1880s, 4 children were discovered murdered here. Their father was blamed for the murders but never brought to trial, and their mother went missing, and ever since, this old house has been the topic of much controversy, including ghost stories. Mr. Coldrake noticed his hands were sweaty. Why was the father never brought to trial? He simply vanished. Some say he walked into the ocean and never came back. Some say he lives nearby, keeping an eye on the house. Although he would have passed by now, but you never know. Mr. Coldrake walked slowly down the corridor and into the kitchen. The faucets were rusted and hanging crooked. The oven door was missing, and inside was the charred remains of a small fire. The back door beside the pantry was locked with several deadbolts. Can we get out to the backyard? Mr. Miles searched his pockets for the keys. He slipped past the large man and slid the key into the lock. It snapped open as if wanting to let them out. The second lock fell to the floor with a loud bang. The door opened swiftly and the cool outside breeze gushed in, as if the house was taking a breath. Mr. Miles stood to the side so his employer could squeeze past him. He stood on the balcony and looked out over the overgrown backyard. It will need some work. What is it you plan to do with this house? Mr. Miles asked, twirling his moustache between his fingers. Let's just say accidents happen. Miles stepped between Coldrake and his stare over the heavy overgrowth. You're not saying, all I'm saying, Coldrake said, his hand slumped heavy on his shoulder. These old houses, they catch fire all the time. The wiring is dodgy, you remember the rats? You saw it with your own eyes. Sir, I have to protest. Miles was suddenly cut off as he was pushed out of the way. And what is that? Coldrake yelped, darting from the rear stairs that led off the balcony. Miles squinted to see what he was looking at. Amongst several overgrown hedges and hidden by vines and weeds was a well. The bricks long, sun-bleached and rotting, the crude concrete used to hold it together had turned into a brown sludge that had dried and hardened, resembling cake frosting. Coldrake stood marvelling at it. This, he screamed, will be the main water feature. Water feature? Miles said, making his way towards the well. We will tear it out. Build a fountain in memory of the children. People will flock here to see it. Don't you think that's in bad taste? Miles interjected. Coldrake turned around to face him. His eyes were quickly diverted to the top window of the house. Standing in ghostly silhouette were 4 children. They all looked down towards the well. Coldrake gasped and stumbled backwards, tripping on a fallen branch and rolling onto the ground. He hit his head on the well and screamed in agony. Miles looked up to the window, but could see nothing but cracked glass. Coldrake got to his feet. His trousers were dirty and his head was bleeding. "Get the documents ready, Miles," he demanded, staring at the house. "This house will no longer be here in 2 weeks." They rushed back into the house and out the front gate. Coldrake snagged his elbow on a loose wire, but didn't stop. They got into the car and drove as fast as they could away. The ghost children watched as the car sped down the street and out of sight. "Did you hear what they said, Frederick?" "Yes, Emily." "What are we going to do? If they burn the house down, we go with it. We have to find Gwen." Chapter 4. Gwen's room was in the attic. She preferred it up there away from her fighting parents. On a good night she could only hear the bickering, but on the bad nights the screaming would travel all the way up into her room. It was Saturday morning and she had to return to school for a 3-hour detention. The library and the ghost children had taken up most of her free time and she had neglected to do any homework or even attend school. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked out the window that her father had installed. The clouds were overcast. The grey was the same as burnt metal. Far in the distance she could see long strips of rain, and soon it would be here. She got dressed quickly and grabbed her backpack. It had her books and homework in it, as well as her diary and all the findings about the child murders. She slipped on her old Converse shoes and headed downstairs. Her father was gone. More than likely had made an excuse to leave the house. Her mother pottered around the quick kitchen. Gwen could smell the alcohol in her glass, and she tried to swiftly move through the corridor and out to the front door. "Gwen?" Gwen froze and kept still. "Gwen, honey?" "Yes, Mum." "Where are you off to?" They were speaking through the walls. Each person's voice sounded muffled and strange, as if it weren't their own. "I gotta go." Gwen thought for a moment. "Back to school to study. The finals are coming up." She hated lying to her mother. "On a Saturday?" she asked. "Can't you study here? Keep me company?" Guilt sat in Gwen's chest like a heavy anchor. "I wish I could, Mum, but all the books are at the school library." There was silence. Gwen took this as her mother giving up her plea. She felt bad when the door shut behind her, but things hadn't been right for so long, and by company her mother meant keep an eye on her while she drinks. When the rain started, Gwen was almost at the school. There was a gloomy feeling about the darkness that enveloped the grounds. The building was old. Her father had even gone here. The windows were time-worn and stained by the weather. She tried the front door, but it was locked. She went around to the car park and saw 2 vehicles side by side. She knew one of them must belong to Mr. Keith. The side door was unlocked and she walked through the empty school. Her footsteps echoed off the metal lockers. A janitor walked past quickly and Gwen jumped. Her bag dropped to the floor. The man snarled and kept going, dragging a floor polisher behind him. She found Mr. Keith in the office next to the library. He was talking to a woman who teaches English, Miss Partridge. She was older than him and wore thick glasses. Both turned and looked at Gwen. "You're late," Miss Partridge said. Gwen looked at her teacher. He gave her a smile. "It's okay, Gwen. Join the others in the library." Gwen smiled back and avoided the English teacher's gaze. She saw 3 other kids in the study area. One was Jay, who had a shaved head and was chewing gum. The other was Ryan, who was leaning back on the chair with his eyes closed. And the last was Loren, who was actually studying. None of them spoke to Gwen or acknowledged her presence. She sat at the last table near the back and got her books out. She tried to study, but found the task boring and uninteresting. She looked around the room for the teachers, but they had come in an hour ago to check on them and hadn't been seen since. She folded the cover of her book and slid it to the side. She reached into her bag and pulled out her notes on the children. There was half a notebook full of things the ghost children had told her, including quotes from people in the town and other articles she had read. She read the notebook from start to finish, and one name kept popping up. Mr. Blackford. The children had mentioned him once or twice in regards to their parents. They would talk about him in an aggressive way. There was another note she had written 2 months ago while talking with Miss Jane, the mail delivery woman. She had mentioned that Mr. Blackford had bought her parents' property nearly 100 years ago, and she was able to buy it back off him. She remembers her grandmother speaking negatively about him. Gwen shut the book and leaned back. She got up from her desk and looked at the rows of books to her right. The first tag said history. She looked back at the students in front of her. One was sleeping. The other weren't paying any attention. She walked down the history aisle. Most of the books were on the World Wars and England. Then she found a small section of local history. There were 3 books. She pulled them all off the shelf and laid them out on the ground by her feet. The first one was titled Property Development in Oak Ridge County. She opened at a random page and fell back with shock. There was a photo of a man with a thick black beard. His ears were tucked in close to his head and he was completely bald. Under the photo was a name, Reginald Blackford. He looked malevolent. It was the way his eyebrows curved and the squint in his eyes. Gwen flipped to the next page and started to read. Her lips moved quickly and she read at a soft whisper. Reginald Blackford came from a town of Weaver's Peak. His main objective was to buy all the land in Oak Ridge County and build a locomotive express rail from Fountain. He was met with much objection and protest. Maria Williamson led the rally against buying all the land. She was quoted as saying, "This is a farming community full of good people, just trying to make an honest living. We don't want the train to zoom past every night, polluting our children and waking the dead." Around the time of the protest, the police indicated there was a high level of household incidents, and several houses were burnt down or destroyed in bizarre nighttime attacks. Mr. Blackford was questioned by police, but later freed. He was quoted as saying, "This is a witch hunt. All I'm trying to do is bring jobs and money into the snivelling community. It's an opportunity of a lifetime, and all you people are squandering it. So be it." Mr. Blackford tried several times to purchase land and was even warned by police that his tactics bordered on harassment. One house that stood in the way was the Brewer family estate. Gwen wrote the names quickly in her notebook. She looked back to the page and tears started to stream down her face. There was a picture of a family all smiling in front of the house. Under the photo, there was a caption, "The Brewer family," with their small children, Frederick, Emily, Sven, and Gertrude. Mr. Blackford needed their house to put the tracks through, she told herself, as if putting pieces of a puzzle together. After the Brewer father wouldn't sell, She stood up quickly. Her head was swimming with black swirls. She grabbed her belongings and ran to the library entrance. "Where are you going?" Miss Partridge snapped. "It's, Gwen froze. "Family emergency." Ghost Children, Chapter 5. "This is the house, Mr. Blackford," Coldrake said, pushing the door so hard it almost broke from its hinges. A tall man with heavy eyebrows stood on the footpath looking up at the house. His beard was blacker than ink and he cast a long shadow. "The house my father tried to buy all those years ago. Now just sitting here, rotting." "Mr. Blackford?" Coldrake said, his hands moving nervously as he held the front door open. Blackford walked up the stairs slowly, as if savouring every single second. When he stepped inside, he bowed his head. The children upstairs appeared in the corner of the attic. Their ghostly apparitions shivered, and Gertrude started to weep. "Your father tried to buy this house?" Coldrake watched the brutish man examine the light switch. He didn't bother trying to see if the power was connected. "Whatever the price, I'll buy it." "Sir?" Coldrake said, spinning around his heels. "I'm sure your colleague, Mr. Miles, informed you this house can't be knocked down." Blackford stepped towards Coldrake. His throat tensed up and found it hard to swallow. "And I'm sure my less than capable colleague told you that accidents happen. Now, take me to the well." "The well, sir?" Blackford looked at him with narrow eyes. He gritted his teeth and ran his hand over his balding head, collecting the sweat beaded on it. Coldrake shook his head and stumbled through the house to the back door, unlocking the deadbolts as quickly as he could. "That man," Frederick said, standing in the attic. "It's him. He looks like—" Sven wiped his eyes. "He looks like the man that came after father that night." "It can't be him," Emily insisted, going to the attic window. "He can't be alive now." Gertrude stayed seated and didn't speak. Downstairs they heard the locks fall onto the floor and the back door open. The children all gathered around the window. Blackford stepped out into the lawn and looked over his shoulder at the house. He stared directly at the children. They gasped and frightened and stepped back away from the window. Blackford smiled and turned back to the well. "I need to ask you a favour, Mr. Coldrake." Coldrake suddenly looked very fearful. "Anything." "I need you to get into the well." I beg your pardon?" "The well," repeated Blackford, as a rarity. "Get in it." Coldrake went to cross his arms, but decided not to. He went to protest the request, but thought better of it. He slept his shoes off and lay his jacket over a branch on a nearby tree. Slowly he clambered in onto the edge of the well. It's a bit deeper than I thought." Blackford smiled and gave him a sudden push. Coldrake faltered and tried to grip the edge, but it was too late. He felt awkward, hitting his head on the way down. It was several meters before he hit the bottom. He was knee-deep in sludge. Mr. Blackford, I—" "Shut up and dig around the bottom." What am I looking for exactly?" Blackford stared back at the window. "A knife." "It is him," Frederick shouted. The glass in the windows shuddered. Then through the front door ran Gwen. Her lungs were pounding in and out so hard she thought her ribs would break. "Children!" she said, trying to catch her breath. In the hallway appeared Emily. She held her left hand with her right. "They're here." "Who?" Gwen said, running up to her. "Who's here?" "Him. The one that killed us." "Stay away from them," Gwen instructed and ran towards the back door. She was just about to run onto the grass when she saw Blackford. He was identical to the picture in her book. Blackford looked at the sudden appearance of the girl on the back deck. "And who are you?" "I'm the one who knows your secret, Reginald Blackford. You're a murderer." Blackford smiled and ignored the pleas from Coldrake, who was trying to scramble out of the well. Blackford's steps were long and broad, and he crossed the grassy knoll quickly. "Reginald Blackford was my father. I am Tenacious Blackford, his only surviving son. And again, girl, who are you?" "I'm Gwen," Gwen said through gritted teeth. "You're the one keeping the ghosts here, I assume." Gwen was taken back for this statement. "You know of them?" "The ghost children have been scaring off potential buyers for some time. One purchaser in nearly 100 years, and now it's finally for sale." "What do you want with them?" "I don't want anything with them." A skinny hand reached up from the well, holding a knife. It was rusted and covered in dried blood. "No, I don't care about ghosts. All I want is to finish what my father started. Burn the house to the ground and build the railway." He pulled a box of matches from his pocket and smiled. "But first—" Blackford spun around, quickly dropping the matches on the ground. He swiped the knife from Coldrake's hand and pushed him back down the well. "The one thing my father did wrong was leave witnesses. My father spent years tracking down the brewer father, until finally he found him." Frederick appeared downstairs at the kitchen window. His hands were fists. Tears streamed down his face like curls of mist. Sven was behind him. "You're evil," Gwen said, "and greedy. All this for fame and fortune?" "We've all got to start somewhere." Blackford bolted across the lawn and up the stairs. Gwen barely had time to react. She ran back inside and slammed the door behind her. Emily and Frederick tried to help her keep it closed as Blackford belted on it with his fists, the bloodied knife still in his hand. "I'll burn this house to the ground with you in it." Gwen, Sven yelled. "You have to get out." Gwen took her weight off the door and sprinted for the front room. Gertrude appeared. Her face was sullen and her ghostly hands were shaking. "Gwen, you don't want to end up like us. Quickly!" She ran with her hand to the front door. Frederick stood in front of Blackford. He didn't appear to be scared of him at all. "You killed our father." Frederick swung his fist at Blackford. His transparent hand went straight through his head. Blackford grinned, then laughed mockingly. "At least you put up more of a fight than your father." Emily stood to Blackford's right. In her hand was a length of chain. She swung it and wrapped it around his neck. Blackford started to gag. "How are you—" Emily tried to pull it, but Blackford was too strong. He swung his large, open fist counterclockwise and knocked Emily to the ground. Gwen heard the skin-on-skin smack and turned around. Her face went red with anger. "How dare you!" she shouted and ran back to the house. Gertrude tried to hold Gwen back. "Don't, Gwen," she cried. "You have to get out. He'll kill you." Sven kicked Blackford in the shins and he yelped. He swung the knife towards the little boy, but it went straight through his glowing blue skin. Gwen leapt towards the massive man, knocking him backwards. The knife flew from his hands and rattled on the timber floor. Gwen leapt for it, but felt her foot being tugged. Blackford had managed to wrap his fingers around her ankle and pulled her back. He got up and stepped over her, casting a shadow on her small frame. Gwen got to her feet to run, but it was too late. Blackford held the knife and plunged it deep into her stomach. Her eyes jolted open, and she started to lose consciousness. Ghost Children, Chapter 6. Emily and Gertrude picked up a table chair and threw it at Blackford. It hit him square across the back of the head and he screamed with agony. Frederick grabbed Gwen's hand and led her out of the kitchen. "You're hurt, Gwen. You have to get to the hospital." The front door slammed shut. As they approached the hallway, they could hear Sinister laughing. "Father is not pleased," Blackford said. "Although he died many years ago, he is still with me, in spirit." The whole house felt like a dank black fog had suddenly enveloped it. Frederick pulled Gwen away from the edge of the corridor where the dark presence presided. "Up there, quick!" He pointed to the staircase that led up to the attic. Gwen had never been up there. It was the ghost children's personal space. She looked down and saw her shirt was ripped where the knife had gone in. It was missing. Blood soaked into her clothes and ran down both her legs. Her fingertips started to tingle. One step at a time she went up and into the attic. She could hear the thumping of Blackford in the kitchen still. He must have been fighting with Emily and Gertrude. The attic door opened and Sven was there. He held his hand out and Gwen took it. "The knife," Sven said. "He has it still. He'll come up here." "Go to the window. We have to find a way to climb down." Frederick rushed over, but he couldn't yank the window sill upwards. Gwen slumped to the ground, both her hands covered in blood. "I found his father. I found out his father had come here to buy the house off your father, but he wouldn't sell it." Emily appeared in the room. She was panting. He's on his way up." "So he tried to burn it down one night, but your father must have caught him. So he came back with a knife to kill him, but it wasn't here. It was only you four." Gwen started to weep. "He killed you in revenge." The attic door was kicked in and Blackford stood like a menacing creature, his beard dishevelled. "You got it right there, girl. No one messes with the Blackford family. We always get our way." He plunged into the room like a stampeding rhinoceros. The knife held outwards. "It's okay to go now, children," Gwen said, her voice sullen. "You don't need to see this. You don't need to stick around anymore. We know what happened to you. You're free to go." Gwen got to her feet, the window behind her. She watched as Blackford raised the knife high above his head. "Gwen, no." Gwen looked behind the hulking, lumbering creature that was Blackford. Then suddenly she pivoted out of the way as two long hands pushed Blackford in the back. He stumbled forward and through the window. His body fell into a heap on the ground below. His legs and arms twisted, his head at an awkward angle. Coldrake stood there, his fingers shaking, his lips cut, and his eye bruised. "He was about to kill you," he said to Gwen. The ghost children gathered around. Their light was dissipating. Their ghostly arms and legs were starting to evaporate like smoke. "We'll miss you, Gwen," Gertrude said, smiling. "Yeah, Gwen, we'll miss you." Together the ghost children lifted from the ground and slowly rose towards the ceiling, slowly but surely disappearing. Coldrake helped Gwen to her feet and they made it outside. They stopped the bleeding and waited for the ambulance to arrive. Prologue. Gwen had managed to keep her accident from her mother and father. She'd even paid for them to go out for dinner and told her father to buy flowers and not to mention work. While they were away, Gwen cleaned the house and tipped all her mother's alcohol bottles down the sink. She knew she'd be mad, but she had concentrated on someone else's family for so long, she had forgotten about her own. She sat in her room, on her bed, and looked at the notebooks and photocopied pages from the library, all about the ghost children. She folded them all up and tucked them into a shoebox and slid it under her bed. She lay in bed and pulled the covers up around her neck. Even though they were gone, from time to time, she thought she could still hear them giggling in her room, and this brought her comfort. The end.
Thank you for being with us, and as a reminder, leave your comments about the episode on the blog, Twitter or Facebook. Share the podcast by sharing the Twitter or Facebook post for this episode, and if you like what we're doing and you want to get involved, hit us up on the contact page. See you next time.